My name is John Stuart Reid, and I'm an acoustic physics researcher. And I've spent the last 40 years, I think 4 decades of my life, researching sound. So it's a topic which is very dear to my heart. Why? Because sound underpins every aspect of the universe, or almost every aspect of the universe. The only place in the universe where there is no sound is in very rare gases. These are gases where the molecules or the atoms are so far apart that they're not colliding with each other. But whenever you have gases or matter that we think of as solid matter, but whenever you have matter on Earth for sure, then the atoms and the molecules are always having elastic collisions, and that is actually a definition of sound. So in other words, sound underpins everything on this Earth.
Fantastic. So that's why maybe you've also been using sound all the way back in the Egyptian times, and you know something about this, don't you?
Well, I do, because my dad and I used to visit Egypt many times, and on one of the occasions we found ourselves in the Great Pyramid and in the King's Chamber, which has such special acoustic properties. This was actually in early 1996. And 22 years ago or whatever now. Mm-hmm. And on that particular occasion, I lay in the sarcophagus, and which you're not supposed to do. It's a bit naughty, you know.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did. Many people do. And I made a vocal glissando, and at one particular frequency, a low pitch that I thought was somewhere around 100 hertz. Every cell in my body seemed to tingle. And there was this energy that was washing up and down my body from the standing waves created by my own voice lying in that sarcophagus. And so this kind of tingly effect that I received gave me the impression that this was a design feature of the pyramid, and that this was not accidental, it was not happenstance, that somehow they had designed this. So that really got my attention and inspired me to go back the same year, 1996, later in the year, to conduct a series of acoustics experiments in the Great Pyramid. And then I went back again in 97 because I could not complete all of the experiments in 96. And it was actually the 97 experiments that really changed my life forever. Because 3 weeks before going out to Egypt for the 97 experiments, I severely injured my lower back, and I was in a lot of pain, and I at one point thought I would have to cancel the mission to Egypt. And but in the end I just gritted my teeth and took lots of painkillers and managed to get into the Great Pyramid. Other people carried the equipment in and so on. And but what happened, this experiment that I conducted in 97 was essentially to make the resonances in the sarcophagus, this granite box, which is 3.7 tons of granite hollowed out, to make those resonances visible, because when you strike the sarcophagus with say the side of your fist, it rings like a low-pitched bell. You know, this particular granite from Aswan is very rich in quartz crystal, about 20% or 25% even quartz crystal. So it's a very resonant material. And I wondered if the resonance had somehow contributed to this amazing effect that I had experienced a year earlier. So the experiment was designed to make those resonances visible, and the way I designed the experiment was to stretch a membrane across the open top of the sarcophagus and to weight it around the perimeter with little bags of sand, which I had collected outside the pyramid. We've got lots of sand in Egypt, you know.
Yeah.
And anyway, to create an even torsion across the surface of the membrane. And then in the bottom of the sarcophagus, I placed a small loudspeaker connected to an electronic oscillator. And then the final component is to sprinkle on some more sand onto the membrane itself. In the sarcophagus, and what I expected to happen, that I would get some kind of random patterns showing me the vibrations made visible in the sarcophagus. But 2 things happened. The first one was that I began to see what looked like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs appearing in the
In the sand from sound?
from sound, and I was very excited, seeing these what looked like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, and the antiquities inspector also got very excited. He was with me, and he said, "How can I help you? What can I do to help?" And so suddenly he had been transformed from a very bored man watching this crazy Englishman, to suddenly he was animated and he wanted to help. And anyway, so about 20 minutes into this amazing series of experiments, all the pain in my back left me, completely gone. Bearing in mind that most of the frequencies that I was creating in the sarcophagus were low tones, very low frequencies. And then I suddenly noticed I was bending over, looking at the sand move on the surface of the membrane, and as I was changing the frequency to some new frequency, and then suddenly I just consciously realized no pain in my back. So in that moment, I actually thought that, okay, I'm very happy, I'm very excited. My bloodstream is obviously flowing with endorphins, and I believe that the endorphins were masking the pain effectively. And so in my consciousness, I thought, when I finally complete these experiments and go outside the pyramid, the pain's going to come back. But actually, the pain never did come back. So, I realized in that moment that something kind of almost magical had happened. Two things magically happened. First of all, to see these hieroglyphs was astonishing. And then to realize that all the pain had gone, and especially later outside the pyramid and going back to the hotel and so on, never came back, that pain. So I realized that two things. First of all, that this experimental design could become a new scientific tool for investigation of anything that's resonant. That's the first thing. And then the second thing was I realized that sound had obviously been involved, was the prime mover in causing the pain to vanish completely. Having been in pain for 3 weeks up to this point, so that changed my life in two ways. One was to design an instrument that would be using these same kind of techniques, cymatic techniques, the science of visible sound. And then secondly, to begin investigating the mechanisms that underpinned my own healing. Why had that happened? How had this low frequency sounds that I was creating, how had they suddenly created a situation where my cells were happy enough to release the spasm in my lower back and to cause the pain to just disappear? And so this journey that I've been on ever since then has been concerned with the development of the cymoscope instrument, which is what we call the instrument that makes sound visible. No longer using sand, of course, we now use water as the imprinting medium, so we imprint sound onto water. And what that does is it transposes what we would call the sonic periodicities, the vibrations in air that we call sound. These sonic periodicities can be transposed into water to create what we would call water wavelet periodicities. So now what we have in the water is a kind of model of the sound. It's really the sound made visible. And of course, our visual acuity is such that when we can see something, we can understand it at a far better and deeper level.
That's how the world is made.
Exactly. A picture speaks 1,000 words. And cymoscope pictures, especially when you see them in a dynamic form, in a video form, speak 10,000 words. There's so much happening in the water when you see a sound made visible that suddenly we can understand it at a much better level than we can with conventional acoustic instrumentation.
Yeah. So I would like to ask you, when you did this hieroglyph inside the pyramid,
yes,
was it a square you put the skin on, or?
Well, yes, the sarcophagus is rectangular.
Yes, it's rectangular. So I thought, could you also get a hieroglyph in England if you would make it? Maybe it was all the resonant, all the room that was made for that hieroglyph.
I think it's a good question, Githa, but I think not. No. And the reason is because my hypothesis, how some people would think, okay, the ancient Egyptians had some kind of special high technology, then they've embedded hieroglyphic features into the sarcophagus. That is not my hypothesis. You know, my hypothesis is that all sounds, when they encounter a membrane, create a pattern.
Yeah.
These are the laws of physics.
Yes.
If you have sound and you have
yeah.
a membrane, you have to have a pattern. Of course, we don't see it; it's invisible. But with special lighting and special conditions, we can make the pattern visible. Okay. So, in the case of the sarcophagus, my hypothesis is that the rich harmonic sounds that are created by Aswan granite, you know, the granite that they use for the Great Pyramid came from Aswan, which is
so it was because of the
500
material.
kilometers to the south. It's the only place in Egypt where they have this granite, and they had to bring it up the Nile. I think it's 500 kilometers to the Githa site.
Yeah.
The crystals in that granite contain specific resonances.
Yes.
And when you make those resonances visible, they look like hieroglyphs. Now, how does this connect with actual hieroglyphs? And my hypothesis is very simple. That the sarcophagus itself would be brought to the work site at Giza, having already been completed in Aswan. So they quarry the granite in Aswan, and then all the work that they do to prepare that sarcophagus is also completed in Aswan. Okay, that's where the workmen would be working. Why would they do it that way? Well, because it's a 3.7 ton granite box when it's hollowed out.
Yeah.
You can imagine how heavy that is.
How could they get it?
When it, that's a different question.
But, also sound.
but you know, to get it to take it to Cairo, to Giza, it would be much heavier as a solid block.
Yeah,
so may as well, you know, do the work on it to hollow it out in Aswan. Okay, so what happens is when you use a tool against granite to begin to hollow it out, any tool that you use, it doesn't have to be metal. They very often used very dense balls of stone called dolerite. These dolerite stones, when you hit granite with them, the granite rings like a bell. Like I was explaining earlier, it has this kind of ringing sound. Now, there's two possible scenarios that I see. What happens when you create this sound from granite in Aswan? You've got these men working on the granite to hollow it out, okay? There are two possible hypotheses. One is that the sounds that are being created are impinging on the workman, but also on the scribe who is standing by the side of the workman measuring the work. You know, in Egypt, when there was no money, they did not use money in Egypt. The workmen were paid with food, with salt, with beer, with bread. You know, these were the commodities that were paid to the workmen. But they were paid in accordance with the amount of work that they did. So they would always have a scribe standing by whose job it was, you know, to measure the work. Okay, how many hours are you doing on this sarcophagus, whatever. So as the scribe is standing there making a note of the work, he is receiving the sounds from the granite that's being, you know, struck with this ball. And these sounds contain, when they impinge on a membrane, they contain geometry, as we've seen. So every cell in the body of that scribe has a membrane. Every cell has a membrane. Okay?
Like any human body,
Yeah. So he and also your skin is a membrane.
Yes.
So he's receiving these patterns all of the time. Every time the ball is struck on the granite, he's receiving these patterns. Now, maybe not consciously, but at some subliminal level, he is receiving the pattern. And so he goes away to his home at night, and he sleeps. And as he's sleeping, he's thinking about these patterns at some level that he has seen. He thinks, this pattern, this is a good pattern. I will use this pattern to create hieroglyph for language.
Yes.
Okay, so it just so happens that the very first time in Egypt that they were working with granite, according to the Egyptological view, is 3900 BCE. This is the date in history when granite was first worked in Aswan. Okay, and it's according to the Egyptological view, it's actually exactly the same date when the hieroglyphic language was first being developed. So I don't think that's a coincidence. I think, I mean, it could be a coincidence, but I don't think it is. I think what's happened is they start to work with the granite in Aswan. The scribes are standing there. They are receiving these wonderful, rich harmonic sounds.
Yeah, and it will be higher and higher.
Yes.
Lower and lower, the more they will.
Yes, and at some level, subconsciously or consciously, I don't know, they see these patterns. That's one hypothesis. The other one is even simpler. It's just that around the same date in history, again, it seems like a big coincidence, but according to the history, around that same date is when the first evidence of drums, a drum that you would use in music, first evidence of drums being used in Egypt. Maybe they used them earlier than 3900, but there's no actual evidence, where you've literally got a drum that you found archaeologically and you've been able to date it. So the first drums are also found around that same date. So let's say they have a drum in the quarry where the men are working with the stone and they're working with the granite, and let's say that there's some sand on top of this drum, and that they're making these sounds,
and then
they're seeing patterns on these drums form, and the scribe is looking at these patterns.
Yeah, of course, because
thinking,
there's so much sand it could be laying on.
just blowing on, and then they're looking at these patterns and they're thinking, this is an interesting pattern.
No, it's from God,
In
from
a
the
sense,
gods,
yes.
probably when it's coming every time they hear it.
They would certainly think it was magic. I mean, in a sense, it is from God because all vibration
is God. Yeah.
So anyway, that's the hypothesis, and then so that kind of explains the existence of the hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus. That the what look like hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus.
Because I was thinking also the ancient symbols, in India and all that, these kinds of things, they have also been shown in cymatics, and I'm thinking,
is there a connection there?
Yeah, it is, because some Hensiani, that make cymatics, he also made some of them. I mean, it's amazing.
Yes, I think there is a connection. I have not conducted any research.
No, but which sound will do it and under which conditions, because I think it's very interesting, because we must have also a pattern for each of us, and equal things and individual,
Well, you're absolutely right, Githa, because, the cymoscope instrument now, using water as the imprinting medium, just pure water, every person has a unique voice. I mean, we know this anyway. You pick up the phone and someone speaks to you and says, hello, Githa, and you immediately know who that is.
Yeah.
They don't have to say, their name, from the sound. And so even with the narrow bandwidth of the telephone instrument, you still know who the person is, without them saying. So every person's voice is unique to them. What the cymoscope instrument allows us to do is to, I know we have some little noise in the background, but no worry. What the cymoscope instrument allows us to do is to make that sound visible. And so we call that a voice mandala.
Oh, yeah.
So using the Indian term mandala, this is a voice mandala.
Yeah.
And what we see when we look at a voice mandala is unique geometry for every person.
Yeah.
So your voice mandala is completely different to my voice mandala. We all have a unique voice mandala. And that voice mandala is a kind of, it's almost like a blueprint for our DNA, because it's really our DNA which gives us our unique voice. And therefore, we can relate the voice mandala back to the DNA.
So maybe that could be an idea, that let's say I have a student or somebody in the workshop that we're singing ourselves free of traumas sometimes. If you had the mandala before and after, because the voice changed. Sometimes you could simply hear the voice get softer, and this something like little bit high tension disappear after.
Oh, you're absolutely
that could
correct.
be exciting to do this.
You may know of the work of Shari Edwards.
Yes, I know.
Yes, and her instrument shows us these differences, because you're right. When you have an illness, your voice, the character of your voice changes. In fact, my voice now, because we've been here 3 days, we're quite tired. I know I am tired. And I can actually hear this in my own voice.
It's very intensive. I mean, you can't shift the gear now.
No.
You couldn't go in and swim or have any sauna. It's not that time.
If I made my voice visible now with the cymoscope instrument and then looked at it in 3 days' time, perhaps when I've rested, it would be quite a bit different. The main geometry would be very similar. But the little frills, the little frilly aspects of the mandala around the perimeter, they would change with the character of my voice. And so you're right. If you take someone who has an illness, and then however they become well again, whether through the use of sound or other modalities, when they are well, and you then check your voice pattern again, the voice mandala, you would see a significant difference in that voice mandala.
So maybe it even could be used as a kind, if you knew all the illnesses, like you have the iris analyze, how you call it in English, when you look at the eye, like a mandala, also to see the illnesses, people.
Oh yes, iridology.
Okay. Maybe it could be used like this with the voice.
It probably could, yes. I think that I see that happening some years, in the future. But yes, a definite possibility. And then, you asked earlier, we were talking about sound therapy. How does sound actually cause the body to heal? What is it? What are the characteristics of sound that causes that to happen? And how was I healed in the Great Pyramid in 20 minutes, only a short period of time? It would probably take me quite a long time to describe the whole process. But in very simple terms, there are two mechanisms. The first one is in your body, your whole body is covered in nociceptors. These are the nerve endings. We have nerves everywhere, and in the tips of our fingers, for example, millions and millions of these little nociceptors, which is why our fingertips are so sensitive. And this is why, blind people can read Braille and so on, because the fingertips are just so sensitive. But the whole body is covered in nociceptors.
I'm sorry, but that's where they feel it when I've given sound healing to people. They say, why my fingers are like, they can
tingling.
It's tingling.
Exactly, tingling. Okay, it's a very good point. So, talking about these nociceptors, which are the very ends of the nerves in your body, they connect with fibers that are called afferent fibers. These afferent fibers are carrying, there's various types of afferent fibers. I'm not going into all the details, but there's various categories of afferent fibers, but all of them are all capable of being stimulated by mechanical pressure. This is why, if you have a pain, say someone, you injure your leg in some way, and you have a severe pain in your leg, you immediately go to your leg and you hold it tightly. You put pressure on your leg or your shoulder. You hold it very tightly. And you find that this pressure that you put onto your shoulder, it mediates the pain. It immediately gives you relief from the pain.
You hold it because something pain, you hold it.
Now the reason that happens is because the nociceptors are sending signals. When you put pressure on them, the nociceptors are sending signals to the midbrain, and what the midbrain does when it receives these pressure sensors, it creates opiates. These are literally pain-mediating substances that block any further pain reaching the midbrain. So it's kind of a way of neutralizing or mediating the pain.
So that's why the sound can do it too.
The sound does it because sound is mechanical pressure. And particularly low-frequency sound has a very, very beneficial effect.
I have that experience too. My voice just started to make them. And in the first time, 25 years ago, it started started to come.
Yes.
I want to sing normal, but it just started. And the people said, "Oh, please, could you continue? It feels good, you know."
Feels good.
But I felt so ashamed by, and that's the thing when we're doing this. You have to get used to it.
Yes,
It doesn't
yes.
sound so well, but it's. After I did this, I mean, all kinds of things got healed.
Wonderful.
And I had the same things that in the bones,
Yes.
like the back, a broken fracture can be healed like 2/3 of the time.
Exactly.
In some cases.
So the first mechanism is this low frequency sound.
Yes.
Across quite a large range of low frequencies, you know, from the lowest note that a human being can make, a man, a bass, singer, is down to about 50 hertz, something like that, 50, 60 hertz.
But with undertones.
Oh yes, undertones as well. That's true.
Yeah.
But then, the male voice range goes up to quite a few hundred, and many women can sing down to 100 hertz or even lower. So all those low frequencies are beneficial for, first of all, pain mediation. So that's the first thing, right?
Yes.
Important to remove the pain, because when you remove the pain,
No tension.
the whole body can relax,
Yes.
because pain gives you tension.
Yes.
But then the other thing is that when a system of the body has received trauma, in this case, in my case, with my lower back, it had received trauma. Why? Because I had done something really silly. I had bent down at the wrong angle to lift something, twisted my spine at the same time as bending. That's really bad for a spine.
Yes.
And I'd injured, the tissues in my lower back. So all the muscles were in this kind of spasm. Now, what does that mean to the actual cells themselves, in my tissues? What it meant was that the cells have gone into a kind of protection mode.
Yeah.
This protection mode, in biological terminology, is called the G0 phase of the cell. And what it means is that the cell is sleeping. It's no longer in the normal process of cell cycle.
It's hibernating.
It's kind of hibernating, right? It goes to sleep to protect itself and to heal. And, if you visit a doctor and you've got a very painful back condition, he or she will probably tell you, well, what you need is rest.
Yes.
And actually, that is very largely true.
Correct, yeah.
It is correct, because it will take time for those cells to recover their energy and to come from G0 into what's called the G1 phase, which leads ultimately to replication, to mitosis of the cell, and so on. But while the cells are in the G0 phase, the body creates protection for that area of your back, and that area of your back will go into a spasm to try to stop movement happening, just so you can have the healing. Okay, so the surface of every cell in your body. So now we're talking about the cells in my lower back. The surface of every cell has hundreds, sometimes thousands of little projections that come out of the cell membrane.
Yes.
And these little projections are called integral membrane proteins.
Oh.
Okay? And some of them, not all of them, but some of them are sensitive to sound, and some of them are sensitive to light. Okay? They're like little antennae.
So it's good to be in the light and do sound, actually.
Yes. So what happens when sound, in this case, like in the Great Pyramid, these low frequencies that I was creating, when they were entering my body, now you can visualize a pattern that's actually surrounding the cell. And one of the things that I've noticed when making sound visible with the Simoscope instrument is that the pattern is very often rotating. It's not static. It's a kind of rotational effect. I'm not going to go into all the physics, why that is. But the important thing to know about this is that when these low frequencies are entering your body and surrounding, literally creating a pattern on every cell, that pattern is almost always gyrating. It's moving backwards and forwards. And now you get this kind of thought that this pattern of energy that's literally imprinted onto the cell membrane is kind of massaging the little integral membrane proteins. It's just gently massaging them. And what it's doing, I think, is it's saying to the cell, it's okay, you can wake up now, here is some energy, here's some gentle energy, It's okay to wake up.
Yeah.
And so the cell thinks, I feel much more comfortable now, and so as soon as the cell comes out of the G0 phase and starts to go into the G1 phase, it also sends a message to that area of the body to release the spasm. So the spasm that was blocking my lower back, after 20 minutes, that spasm goes.
Yes.
And all the cells in that area of my body wake up again, and they think all is well. And all was well because the pain never came back. So that's a kind of very, broad brush kind of snapshot of how sound therapy actually works.
So the sound actually can treat all what has to do with this tension or this hibernating cells.
Yes.
But if there's a fracture, it will take a little bit more time. Or
fractures.
Or something where most, because that's why I never say I can be sure that it will work, because there are certain things that it will take more time.
Yes.
And the sound will probably help it to heal faster, but it takes more time.
Yeah, for broken bones and fractures, of course. But certainly, even in the mainstream medical model, ultrasound, which is simply high frequency sound, is used particularly for fractures where, say, you've broken your arm in some way, and then you've done something really silly. You've got a plaster cast on your arm, but then you lift something heavy with it, and you should not.
No.
But you've done that, and you've changed the way that the body is trying to mend this fracture. And so what happens very often when a fracture is disturbed in that way, the body stops the healing process completely. Just stops it. And so you go back to the hospital with this, silly thing that you've done to your arm when you've already had the plaster cast on, and the only thing the hospital can do is to give you sound. They give you high frequency sound, ultrasound. And that kind of kick-starts the process of healing again. But equally, low-frequency sound can have the same beneficial effect. And this is why there are many stories from the Aboriginals of Australia using the didgeridoo, the Yidaki instrument, to heal broken bones. Same reason, these beautiful low frequencies that they make can actually speed up the rate of bone fractures.
And maybe even if people are stressed, maybe you can be lucky. I had some coincidence where we found the place in the body where it's placed, where it's the tension.
Yes.
And a mixture of me healing with the undertones and them seeing themselves free of the traumas that caused this, or maybe they crossed their limits,
Yes.
And then they were free.
I think the same process is probably at work, because stress causes tension in the body. The muscles tense up. These are spasms that that are, again, the body is trying to protect itself.
Like the autonomous system probably said, okay, now it's enough. You don't know how to handle it. Listen to me.
But the sound that you're creating, whether with your own voice or with some external instrument, could be a Tibetan bowl or a crystal bowl or a harp or a piano or any kind of instrument that creates sound, can enter the body and cause the cells in the body to receive that energy and to relax and to leave go of the tension, basically. So sound is very, very healing. In fact, sound, it was Pythagoras who first said that sound could be used in place of medicine. It was his biographer, one of his biographers, Iamblichus, who said that Pythagoras said sound could be used in place of medicine. And it just so happens to come full circle back to where we were talking about ancient Egypt, that Pythagoras traveled in Egypt. So it's quite possible, I think it's possible, that Pythagoras was given a lot of knowledge about acoustics and healing from the ancient Egyptians, and then he goes back to his home and starts to teach, what he learned in ancient Egypt. I'm fairly sure about that.